Thomas Henley's with me today. He's a British Taekwondo athlete who won a gold for Britain in the 2014 Commonwealth Games. He's also autistic and runs the Asperger's Growth YouTube channel and presents the Thoughty Autie podcast. His new documentary, Asperger's in Society, is also available on his Asperger's Growth channel. And Thomas, one of the things I really like about the stuff that you put out is that you really are very incisive and perceptive about the differences between the experience of life of autistic people and non-autistic people and how they can understand each other better. And that's the main reason I wanted to talk to you today, actually, because the people who watch this program, some of them will be parents of autistic children who they will, want to understand their children better and what their children are going through. And you're also young enough to remember chunks of your childhood, and we'll be talking about some of that as well. And some of the people who are watching will be autistic people. And I think the stuff that you say is really helpful for autistic people to understand themselves and their place in society, especially autistic people like me who spent most of their life without knowing that they were autistic, and so not really knowing why some things were different. And some people will just be people who are not autistic who want to learn more about how things work. So I think that's good on all counts. And I want to start with a question that on your podcast, I know that you ask people at the end of your interviews, but I think it's really good for us in terms of where we start. What is autism to you? What does it mean to you in the context of your life so far?
Autism is, I think it's a difficult thing to boil down into a short sentence. I guess in terms of like the traits of autism, you could go on forever and ever about the sort of differences. To me, it is, in my view, a very significant neurological difference between someone who is autistic compared to someone who isn't. In terms of its sort of influence on my life, I only really started learning about autism when I was sort of going into university, and it was more of a way of me understanding myself and the interactions that were going on around me. It is a very difficult thing to sort of wrap your head around, especially if people haven't been introduced to it before. But to me, it's a combination of certain difficulties in life, just the typical sort of sensory stuff. But it's also a lot to do with the positive aspects. So it's a lot to do with differences in thinking, and we talk a lot about neurodiversity, which is sort of, I guess, celebrating the differences that people have. And to me, I view autism more as a sort of a coined term by myself, diffability, rather than a disability, because it's not so plain that it's a bad thing, and it shouldn't be a bad thing in people's eyes.
So you say you started to learn about autism around the age of, I guess, 18 or so when you were going to university, but you were yourself diagnosed as autistic a few years before that, weren't you? So what was your experience of childhood, and how was your experience as an autistic child growing up? How do you think that differed from the experience of someone who's not autistic?
Well, I guess during the time sort of pre-primary school, there wasn't a massive amount of sort of visible differences between myself and the people around me. It wasn't the case that I was really aware that I was any different to other people. I guess there were a lot of traits back then in terms of stimming that I used to do. I used to spin around in the lounge, which used to get on my parents' nerves quite a lot. I used to like going trampolining. I used to very much, do all those typical kind of autistic sort of emotional regulation things. And then I guess once I moved to primary school, and sort of the tail end of primary school, sort of year 3, I believe, Then I just started to feel a bit off about things. I felt a little bit like I was an alien, like I've come down from space, and things that I was trying to put across and things that I was saying to other people, didn't really seem to, people didn't really seem to get what I was trying to put across.
Yeah.
And it was the same sort of vice versa. So I struggled a little bit with what was happening in the social world of the playground. And that did sort of cause a little bit of difficulty in terms of anxiety and stuff. But I was always a very bubbly, sort of friendly kid that would talk to anybody who showed any interest in me or was friendly towards me. I think that the part where the difficulties really came in was about 2 or 3 years into secondary school. I started to develop a lot of anxiety about life. I was sort of harassed to some degree during those times on the bus on the way to school, by people in the school in terms of like rumors and all of that kind of stuff. And that really got to me at my core, and I started to realize just how out of tune I was from the social world at secondary school. And I developed a lot of mental health conditions, including quite severe anxiety, panic disorders, quite severe depression, and some other dissociative disorders. And it was more or less a really difficult time in my life. Especially, yeah, secondary school was absolutely awful.
Mm. I
I
think
would not wish that experience on anybody in my life. And
it's a really common thing to hear autistic people say that, though, isn't it? So, going back, it's like at the beginning, you didn't feel any different. It might have been that other people noticed you as not being, not being the same in terms of how you present, but you didn't notice that yourself until around the end of primary school. And at that time, how did you make sense of that in your mind? What was going on in your mind when you noticed that there were some differences? And I know you were a young child, and it was, probably not fully formulated thoughts or anything. But looking back, do you have a sense of what was going on for you at that time?
It was a lot of confusion, especially when there was times of conflict, sort of not like major conflict, but times of disagreement with other children on the playground. That really boggled me to my core. Like it was nothing. I didn't really understand what was going on in those situations. But I guess in terms of an actual feeling and thoughts, it was more or less just curiosity. I found other people very interesting. I was confused at why they acted in certain ways.
Yeah.
So it was less about me feeling like I was left out and more, ooh, this is a bit strange. Why are these people acting this way? Like I need
Yeah.
to try and learn more about these people. And
So that's interesting. So it's like there was no judgment there. It wasn't, you were not judging yourself, you were not judging other people, you were very open, and it was just curiosity. And I think in my experience as well, that's another really common autistic trait, not to jump to judgments or condemnations or anything like that, but to be really open. And then when you got to the senior school, that's when I guess it became something that was more of an issue and more problematic. Can you say a little bit more about that, about what that was about?
oh, it's something that I've tried to explain to people before, but it sort of feels like one day, one sort of summer holiday, everybody in my year and sort of the above years and below years got together and made up these bizarre social rules that I had no idea about, and then came back to school and enacted them in sort of daily life. And it's very much like being a little bit in open water. Every situation is fraught with anxiety and paranoia because you don't know what's going on and
Yeah.
you're still trying to understand the situation a little bit better. Um, it can be very difficult. I think one of the anchors that I had during those times was sort of like text messages and messaging over Facebook and stuff like that. That was my way of interacting with people. And it wasn't very often that I would go out and actually interact with people, because it was just so, it was like a minefield in my head, and I felt more comfortable with isolating myself and staying quiet, being the observer in the group, I suppose.
What happened what happened to bring that anxiety about? Because you'd noticed some differences in primary. When you got to be a bit older, was it just that the scale of the differences became bigger, or was it that there was maybe an edge to them, maybe an edge of harshness or unkindness to them, which made it a dangerous thing to explore rather than something very interesting to explore?
I think it's a combination of both the things that you said. It's very very much. I've always been the type of person to sort of step back and analyze the situation before I enter it, especially if it's something that I'm not really sure about. So as a kid, I would always sort of stand at the side of new places that my mum or dad was taking me to, and it's sort of the same in the secondary school environment, but there wasn't really any opportunity for me to catch up with people at that point. So it was too much of a big task. I sort of compare it to taking on a full-time university degree, and obviously that's quite hard to juggle. It's quite hard to analyze situations in yourself and get it straight in your head when you've got to revise and you've got to socialize to some extent, or with dealing with the mental health. I suppose it's very much a juggling act, and it was only something that I really started to understand a bit more once I exited school. But I suppose by then the damage that the bullying and the isolation did to my sort of emotional brain was already done.
Yeah, and I know you speak very openly about this, and anything that I ask, if you don't feel comfortable answering, please just don't answer. But if you do, how would you explain the bullying? Where did it come from? Do you have a sense of what the process was to make that happen, and what effect it had on you?
Yeah, I suppose there's different sort of categories of bullying at school. There's a sort of transient bullying, I guess, that happened a lot on the bus, and it was more of a more in terms of like people poking at me constantly. So for example, like people talking to me that I don't particularly like, sort of insulting me, physical things like putting a bag over my head, just minor things like that make the journey to school harder. Which
And
I
are
know,
really intimidating as well, aren't they?
yeah, and it's not always people that I find particularly intimidating. It's just I'm not sure how to act in that situation. I wasn't sure how to act in that situation. And then I guess there's the actual physical bullying that happened more with sort of the male popular kids at school. I remember this one time where I was stood outside one of the classrooms, and a whole sort of group of guys sort of surrounded me, and I think it was that they'd said something to me that I found offensive, so I sort of bit back a little bit. So they surrounded me and they started punching me in the balls repeatedly. That's an example of physical bullying. I think that the most, to be honest, that's not the worst. The worst is the emotional stuff. in terms of rumours, people talking about you behind your back, or sometimes even in front of your face,
Yeah.
using all of the sort of non-verbal ways of communicating that I didn't particularly understand. That was the hardest bit for me to deal with, and the more that it happens, the more that I became this sort of social drifter, where I sort of drift into different groups to be with people that I considered to be good friends. And then obviously if something went bad and I started to be picked on a lot in that group, then I'd move on to a different one. I ended up basically just spending most of my time in the library, or the nurse's office, or the special needs provision at my school, because of the panic attacks and the meltdowns and the anxiety. I got sent home a lot with stomach aches and headaches because of the stress. It was very difficult, and I'm not one to exaggerate, and it was hellish.
I mean,
Hell on earth.
Obviously you went to a mainstream school. That's obvious by now. I mean, I did too, and a lot of the things that you're talking about, I recognize these things, and the bulk of autistic people who go to mainstream schools do. And would you say that almost worse than the things that they did and the things that they said was the fact that so many people were just ready to do that, and that was their perception of you as somebody that they could do that sort of thing too, which just seemed totally, senseless.
It is, but to me it was. I always viewed the people at school as sort of like mindless monkeys. Like, in terms of maturity, I think I was miles ahead of everybody else, in terms of morals and values, and that was sort of reflected in my tendency to talk to teachers a lot more, and parents and adults. That was one of my main sources of actual conversation that I wanted, especially with like philosophy teachers and stuff, talking about the nature of life and all of that. But it it is, it's hard to do anything because I'm not very good at responding verbally under pressure. And I think people view autistic people as an easy target because of that, and because of the sort of aura of somewhat immaturity around autistic people. It seems to be something that some people feel, that, and being a bit different, not really having the social capabilities to stand up for yourself in any sort of productive way, it makes you a bit of a target. And it's not a case that I always didn't reply or anything. There's been situations where there's this one guy who's sort of like the biggest guy in my year, really sort of muscly, heavy guy who's quite tall, and he used to come down and sort of harass me and my friends when we were playing football. And there was one point where I went up to him and I said, like, why are you doing this? Like, do you not have anything better to do in your life other than come and harass us? Like, it's very uncomfortable that you come in to do it. It's like, do you not have anything else in your life to do other than come and mess with us? And in that instance, my sort of thinking about it and my planning to make that conversation with this person actually paid off, and he actually left, I guess. It's not always helpless, but it's hard.
And did you have anyone to talk to? I mean, did you feel that you were understood, or you could be understood by the people around you at that time, by the adults around you?
I don't think any adults in mainstream school really have a grasp of what autism is. It's not something that's mandatory in the world of teaching, although it probably should be, considering that there is likely to be at least one autistic person in every year group. The best teachers that I found were actually the ones that were just kind and were willing to listen and were willing to negotiate ways of improving my time in their class or at school. And it was usually the ones that actually engaged with me and listened to what I was saying that were that anchor for me. Obviously, there were teachers that didn't, and just completely just didn't get it, didn't want to listen to me, thought I was being awkward, thought I was just being needing to be pandered to and being difficult.
Yeah.
But the sad thing is that the same way that you have those types of children in school, there's that same group of group of adults in sort of adult life for teachers. So it's it can be difficult sometimes to find that anchor, but it's possible.
What about family?
Family, yeah. My mum and dad are amazing sources of comfort and motivation and support. Anything that I did, my mum supported me in sort of like emotionally and gave me an avenue to start it. And then I guess my dad played more of the active role in terms of helping me to get to places and helping me to maintain interests that I had. So it's kind of like I got the emotional and motivational support from my mum, and my dad helped me enact it in the world, I guess.
Were you able to talk to them about what was happening at school and what you were feeling about that?
I didn't want to, and I think that's not anything to do with autism. I think that's just being a teenager. I was very I wanted to keep myself to myself, and often I'd come home from school feeling very overwhelmed and having to spend a lot of time on my own. So I didn't really have that line of communication, although it was always open to me, and my mum is probably the most supportive person I've ever met. But yeah, I didn't have much of that back and forth conversation about mental health and about the difficulties at school. If I did, it was specific examples that I really just didn't have any idea what to do about, and my mum was usually the person who helped me deal with that.
I ask because a lot of people watching this will be parents of autistic children, some of whom will have children going through experiences maybe not a million miles away from yours, and with their children probably not volunteering what's going on to them. What would you say to them? I imagine that your parents probably had some sort of idea that everything wasn't right, but they didn't want to pry either, I guess. What's the best way, do you think, that parents can help and support children going through something like that?
I think in the same way that some teachers were helpful in terms of just being kind and willing to listen and willing to negotiate and sort of go through things in depth, that is the best thing that you can do. Just be there as a supportive person that's willing to listen, not wanting to immediately judge and immediately offer a simple solution that could be very easily come up with by the autistic person, but to actually have open the conversation to sort of talking about it in depth and explaining the intricacies of the problems that the autistic person has.
Yeah.
That is probably the number one thing in terms of executive function. I think executive functioning is probably something that parents have to do anyway for non-autistic people in terms of cooking and cleaning and stuff. But you've always got to have in the back of your mind that it is good to learn those sort of skills, but just from listening to my experience, it's likely that they are going to be very overwhelmed with their life at school,
Yeah.
and being able to offer them that kind, nurturing sort of shoulder for those types of things as well can be very important. Yeah.
Or maybe even just to create the space, because it's so easy for daily life to move at a very fast pace
Yeah.
and to be full of all the practical things that need to happen. But I guess one of the valuable things that parents might be able to do is to create a space for their children, so that their child has plenty of time with them, plenty of calm time, that's open time, that the child can use in whatever way they want, so that they always know that they've got the space to judge, to bring in those sorts of situations and those sorts of topics if they want to, even if they choose not to.
I think that the best way of doing that kind of thing is to take an interest in your child's special interest. I know
Okay.
we use the term special interest as sort of sounds like a negative thing, but really it's not. It's just quite a strong passion. If
Yeah.
you show an interest in your child's interest, they will want to talk to you for hours and hours about it. Like, that's going to be a massive thing to open up communication. A lot of autistic children and teenagers like gaming. That seems to be quite an attractive thing. And if you can sort of pull yourself into that special interest as much as possible, that would be a good way of opening them up, because that special interest is usually quite a massive anchor emotionally for that person. It gives them a lot of escape, and if you're not
Right.
involved in that escape, then it's going to be quite hard to tap into their world, I guess.
Yeah.
So
So
that's
that's
just one of the things that you can do, I suppose.
That's brilliant. So you're saying that taking an interest in their special interest is not something that's going, because some parents might be worried that if they do that, they're going to be overwhelmed with information about one thing and it'll be hard.
It might be.
But what you're saying is that it could also lead to a greater feeling in the child, that they feel close to the parent, and that could lead to them opening up about other areas and really trusting the parent, because they feel that they're understood more than they would otherwise feel.
Yeah, it's just about developing a relationship with them. We don't like to do idle chit chat about our days at school
Yeah.
or our
That's a really
relationship.
difficult question, isn't it? How was your day at school at all? What do you mean? Which part of it are you talking about?
But I don't even like. There's a thing called Alexithymia, which is a difficulty understanding and categorizing emotions. Like, that question is a very difficult thing for autistic people to answer. Like, even myself, being aware of your own emotions and your feelings towards a day can be quite difficult to boil down into something that's not an essay, I suppose. Just taking that special interest is showing an interest in that, and being willing to, for example, if I don't know, there's typical example of Minecraft. Take them to Minecraft conventions, go with them, like have fun with them, like be involved with it, take an interest in what they're doing with the games, and ask whether you want them to join in, or you want to play with them and you want to learn it. It's as soon as you show that little bit of effort, that you're willing to learn about something that they like, they will reciprocate that. And I think it is one of the ways that you can enter their world, I suppose.
You got your autism diagnosis when you were 10, I believe. Did having that diagnosis have any impact on your experience the following years, maybe in terms of how you understood yourself and your place, how you fitted in, did it help you understand that there was nothing wrong with you, you just had a different neurological type, rather than thinking, oh my God, there's something wrong with me, why am I not the same as everybody else? Or did it not really have much effect?
It didn't really phase me. It was never like, oh, I'm different, I'm worse. It was never like that. It was, if anything, it opened more avenues for me to talk to my parents, because they
Yeah.
obviously knew a lot about autism from just reading about it, I suppose. So they were people that I could go to and talk to about things that I was confused about. Um, it was a positive thing, and I guess there were points in my life where I was sort of vilifying the autism diagnosis and felt like I didn't want it, and
Mm.
it was causing me too much pain and confusion. Um, but as I've got older, I've realised that I actually, if I had the choice, I would never want to be any other way. Um, I just probably wouldn't like the mental health side of things and the non-understanding and quite harsh um, interactions with other people. It's
Yeah.
usually other people that cause these problems.
Yes. Yeah. And it's interesting, isn't it? Because you were talking about how that stuff that happened led to depression and other mental health issues and meltdowns and whatever. And when people often look at autistic people and look at autism, they say, well, autism is those things. Autism is having meltdowns. Autism is having that anxiety. Whereas clearly, from what you're saying, especially, it's not autism that caused that anxiety. It's being in a culture that is really challenging and really harsh, and not the prevailing culture being very different from the way that you normally see things. In the same way as anybody else, if they were put in a culture that they found overwhelming and they found harsh, would end up with the same sorts of anxieties and mental health issues.
Yeah, I'd sort of compare it to. I mean, I obviously don't have any experience of this, but I'd sort of compare it to children who have um, immigrated to I think it's immigrated to England at a young age, or sort of primary, secondary kind of age, with very little language abilities and not really a good idea of what the culture is like. It's very comparable to that. Um, I guess the difference is being autistic is that you've always been in this culture and suddenly it doesn't feel like you fit in anymore. So you feel like an outcast and an alien. It's very weird sort of emotional
Yeah.
experience. Yeah.
What is there anything that you would, having been through growing up in a mainstream school as an autistic person, is there anything that you would like autistic parents of autistic children to know about what their child might be going through and how best to help them?
I think it's always, in a lot of cases, it, it's always safe to assume that they're going to have difficulty at school. It's always safe to assume that there's going to be difficulties with bullying, and sadly, there is a lot of comorbidity with anxiety disorders and mental health. And I think it's always important to reinforce the person's own personality. Especially this is especially important with girls, who tend to do this thing called masking, which is basically just copying other people's facial expressions and interests and way of speaking in order to fit in. And that can be quite destructive to the person's sense of self. And if you don't have a sense of self, even with all the friends around you that you have and all the things that are going on, you can feel very disconnected and lonely, I guess. So for those people, it would be important to reinforce that sense of self, make sure that they understand that there is some give in the individuality that the person can have, and if they do feel like they can't do it at school, it's important to develop that at home. And then I guess in terms of isolation and sort of withdrawal that I've seen happens more with autistic males. Any way that you can facilitate their confidence and their abilities to socialize is very important. For me, things like Taekwondo were really important because it was an atmosphere where it was a fixed thing that I knew what everybody was there to do and I could talk about, and it was something that I could relax myself in more and make the conversation between myself and other people more natural. And then I suppose doing Taekwondo and doing competitions, and although it is quite stressful, really helped build my confidence in myself, my ability to deal with confrontation, my confidence in myself, and my ability to cope with difficulties. That's a very important thing.
Because I guess in terms of the training, there was social interaction, but there were boundaries around it, so it wasn't going to become scary. And then you got the achievement at the end of it. Great. So for parents who noticed that, who noticed that their children might be withdrawing, how can they understand that? How can they make sense of that, of what's going on for the child? Because they might feel that the child's being, unreasonable, or they might have whatever judgments, or naturally because they want to connect with their child and they see their child is stopping that and they don't know what the reason is for that. How would you help parents understand what's going on for the child in that moment and what their child's going through?
In terms of like what kind of age?
Why a child might not be very willing to talk, might not be very responsive, might not seem to listen to what they're doing or what they're saying.
I think that there is always that aspect of withdrawal, because the thing is with anything that we don't understand fully and anything that's unpredictable, which I suppose social interaction is the biggest source of unpredictable things. It's hard to deal with that. It doesn't matter if you are their parent or their good friend. It's if they're withdrawing to conserve energy. They're withdrawing to their special interests, to escape from things. And if you find that they are withdrawing so much that they hardly ever communicate with you, it might be that they are struggling a lot. And it's always important to approach that in a kind way, where rather than enforcing and pushing the interaction onto them in a forceful way.
Yes,
that's a good way to push them away even further and make them isolate themselves in their rooms and stuff like that. Just provide an environment that's comfortable and relaxed and non-intrusive, and just ask them questions that aren't sort of your typical questions that you ask people. How was your day? You can say how was your day. It's not like you can't say that. It's just if you take an interest in the intricacies of their day and what they've said, rather than sort of going over blanket, things like you would with any other child. It's kind of like approaching them like they're a little adult. Like you need to have an actual conversation with them in order to grasp their interest. I think as well, there's always aspects of shutdowns, which is basically a state where an autistic person becomes quite dissociated. So it's usually characterized by going very non-verbal, and because of the difficulty, the sort of uncomfortability with making eye contact, having a shutdown can prevent the person from actually speaking. And I have them as an adult, so I know that it's not an intentional thing. it's always important to give the autistic child or person space if
Mm-hmm.
they're not responding. Just give them an extra 5 seconds, extra 10 seconds, and don't stare at them when to respond and say that they're being rude, because that's a great way of making them do it more often, because it's associated a lot with social anxiety and not knowing what to say. A lot of it is just making them feel comfortable, and it can be very hard to have a child and not feel like you're connecting with that child anymore. But it is always good to remind yourself of the actual things that could be going on in their head and could be going on at school, or in any sort of situation in their life. It can be extremely difficult, and having that awareness and willingness to create that nice, calm, slow environment can be the best way of coping with that.
Yeah, it makes them feel safe, I guess. I noticed with my son that often, I mean, he's still just 10, but sometimes if you ask him a question, he would seem not to answer it at all. And people don't give him time, you know, even his teachers move quite quickly to the next thing, even members of his family. But what we find is when we give him that few more seconds, like you said, he shows that he's been using that time to process and to think of an answer and to respond and to be connected. But it doesn't look like that. And I guess it's really easy as parents to just assume after a few seconds he's not going to answer, move on to the next thing. And that leaves him feeling, well, you've asked me a question and now you're not giving me even time. You're not really interested in the answer, are you? So it's really important just to be aware of that, isn't it? And of how we might unconsciously or unwittingly be closing down the child when we want to open them up.
Pressuring them, yeah. It is difficult. And I mean, myself, I work as a special needs teaching assistant in mainstream and SEN schools, and sometimes I'm a little bit sort of frustrated and bit annoyed with life or the way that the day's going, and sometimes I can be a little bit pushy in terms of getting them to answer. But I think it's always important to be easy on yourself. Like, try not. I think the best thing to do is to try not to put any of that expectation to any of the expectations that you would have on normal neurotypical kids onto autistic children. That processing time becomes shorter and shorter as we get older. We still need processing time depending on our mental state, but it's literally it's a very complex thing that goes on when we try to communicate with people. We have to understand what they're saying. We need to process that into what this thing that they're talking about is, draft up a response in our brain, and then put it out. It's very much a slower process. I suppose best way to do it is if you're like watching TV with them, that's probably the best place to have a conversation. Just say, so what do you think of this? And then just go back to watching TV. And if they don't reply, then ask them again. But maybe that's not the best example, but it's just having that step back of expectation for them to reply instantly, and showing that in your body language can be a good way of opening that communication up.
It's just making me think that for me it was a little bit different in that I always felt the need to meet the expectations. So I didn't, I dealt with it not by not responding and disconnecting, but by trying to respond really quickly. And the result of that was I just came out with a load of rubbish, the most inappropriate sort of responses that made people think worse of me and justified them not wanting to connect with me in the first place.
Yeah, I suppose if you don't have that processing time,
Yeah.
those characteristics of being blunt and direct and unemotional sort of come in. Uh, you've got
Or just panicking and saying the first thing that comes into your head, which is totally unfitting to the situation.
or yes or no.
Yeah.
If yes or no or one-worded answers are usually indicative of you not giving the person enough time to process things, and
Yeah.
it's yeah. If you want a more detailed explanation or answer, you've got to give them that time.
And let them feel that they've got that time and they're not being rushed into it.
Yeah, yeah,
What
definitely.
about, I mean, you mentioned earlier about having meltdowns and things like this, and I'm sort of also interested in exploring how parents can, because parents often feel, what do I do? How can I support my child doing it during a meltdown? So to get down and dirty a little bit, um, if you're comfortable with it, what does a meltdown look like? And is there a difference between meltdown in childhood and a meltdown in adulthood?
Meltdowns meltdowns are characterized by I think the most important thing is to go back to that shutdown first. Shutdowns are basically an attempt to conserve energy by the person's brain. Um, Meltdowns usually occur when the person isolates themselves and dissociates a little bit, but there is still a pressure um, to do something and to communicate or to do something that's uncomfortable. And meltdowns are usually characterized by a sort of rolling, increasing amount of anxiety and lack of ability to function. So even myself in adulthood, I sometimes get meltdowns, and it's a combination of probably the worst panic that you can ever imagine, with an inability to communicate. And when we're in meltdowns, we do a lot of this thing called stimming, which is these repetitive actions that help us to relax. And sometimes these things can be quite sort of not bad, in terms of rocking and twisting and possibly having your head and closing your eyes and doing that kind of thing. But then I guess some people, and even myself in teenagehood, there can be a lot of elements of sort of self-injury.
Okay.
It feels almost like there's these insects in your body, and it's extremely painful, and so you just want to get rid of it. You just want to get rid of the thoughts
Mm.
and the anxiety, and that can sometimes be something that happens. Those self-injurious behaviours, and it can be very hard to watch someone in that situation, especially if they are an adult and you do know them to a certain level. And even if they're just your child, it can be very hard to watch someone go through that.
Yeah.
After it usually for me it lasts around an hour to 2 hours, but it really depends on the situation and the person's mental state on that day, and what's happening around them and the people that are around them. And after the anxiety starts to sort of wash away a little bit, the person may be quite relaxed,
Yeah.
but there is also elements of shame,
Yeah.
elements of depression
Mm.
when the person comes out of it. Depending on the person, um, it can be a very sort of difficult experience, and if it sort of feels like you want to withdraw from the world and hide yourself and make sure that it doesn't happen again. So
Yeah.
it destroys your confidence quite a lot,
Yeah.
especially if you haven't really thought about it before. The best things that you can do are actually the most simple things. Firstly, make sure that they're set in a safe place, and this safe place can be somewhere where there's like a bed or something, somewhere that there's nothing hard that they can hit their head on or anything like that. it's also important to try and remove any sort of sensory stimuli, so any bright lights. Some of the best things that you can do is to go to a dark place, give them some headphones, let them listen to whatever music they want to, piano music probably. That's a good one. And then it's always good to exaggerate your facial expressions, your positive facial expressions. Make sure that you tone down the level of your voice, speaking very softly, kindly, friendly, not pressuring them to answer, but giving them choices so that they can just go, yeah, nod their head or say yes, and making sure that you reassure them that it's okay to be in this situation and that you're there for them and you don't need to do anything. You just need to calm down. So, for example, with the body language and the facial expression stuff, just going, hey, it's okay. Like, don't worry about it. Everything's all right. Just making sure that you're very soft in your voice and that you're smiling and that you're giving them that reassurance. You may also want to massage them or apply some pressure to them, especially on the shoulders or the feet. That can be a really good thing to do. And if you have a weighted blanket or anything, like the fidget bum, stretchy blanket, that can also sort of quell a lot of the anxiety.
Those are really great suggestions. I especially like the part about assuring them that everything's okay, because you were talking about how the meltdown itself is a release of tension, and I guess that's why you feel relaxed afterwards, because this is built up. But the shame, I guess, is because you don't believe that it's okay to have to go through that and to
You
have
don't want to
behave
put
like
anyone
that.
else through it as well.
Sorry, Thomas.
You don't want to put anybody else through it,
Right.
especially like
Yes.
friends, and
Yeah.
you don't want to be a nuisance. And you often feel like a nuisance when it happens.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's not something you're choosing. It's almost like what happens is out of your control when it's happening. So I'm sure that getting that reassurance that everything is fine, that it's fine that this is happening, and that the person with you is fine with it too and can cope with it and is not being put out by it, that must be really, really powerful. As long as it's real, of course, because if it's not, if the person is really feeling stressed and says, "Oh, don't worry, it's all right," then the child or the person is
It needs to be genuine.
You've got to be genuine
and exaggerated. You may feel a bit silly doing it, especially if it's an autistic adult, but it can make the difference between a 2-hour meltdown and 20-30 minutes.
Yes.
Can really make the world, just those simple things that I've suggested.
So what about now, Thomas? What about adult use? We've talked a lot about your childhood. What has how would you describe yourself now in relation to autism, in relation to being autistic in the world now? What does it mean to you now as opposed to what it meant to you when you were a child?
When I was a child, it was more of an explanation for weird phenomena that I was experiencing. It was more of an avenue for me to deal with negative experiences better, especially when it's something that I've done or interactions that I've had. And then I guess nowadays I do see it as a more integral part of myself, like more integral part of my personality. I enjoy the aspects of myself that are typically autistic, and I enjoy the way that I think, and I enjoy the way that I behave. And as I've got older, the more that I've worked on my social skills and built those foundations up, and the more that I've wrote about my experiences and researched psychology and researched social skills and all of that stuff, the more of a concrete picture I have of myself and what I should be doing in the world. And nowadays, like, I've got a good, great long-term relationship that I'm really happy in, and I've got some lovely, amazing, supportive friends from all different areas of the country who, sure, maybe immediately didn't get on with me quite so swimmingly and didn't really understand what autism was about. But with time, with my explanations of different things, the bond has probably grown stronger than I think most people would have with a lot of their friends.
That's really nice to hear, because a lot of people might think autism means you're an inevitability of an unhappy life. What do you say to that?
It's more or less inevitable that it's going to make life harder in workplaces and school and in terms of mental health. If we can get rid of those aspects, woohoo! Like we're scot free. We've done all the work that's needed. Um, but actually being autistic is definitely not a tragedy. It's like autistic people tend to be more smart than your average person. Um, there is a lot of positive aspects of being autistic, in terms of work and in terms of interests and in terms of morals and values. There's so many benefits, to having an autistic person in your life if you're not. Um, very loyal, very direct, very truthful, honest, always looking to have your best interests at heart, and there's so many things that I could rattle on for
Okay.
ages. Um, yeah,
And I think often autistic people don't have the impairments that people think that they have. Autism is almost defined in terms of impairments, but well, I saw some research recently and I lost it. I couldn't find it again, so I can't tell you what it was, but I read about it, and it was they got three groups of people together. They got a group of autistic people, a group of non-autistic people, and a group of 50-50 mixed, half autistic, half non-autistic people. And they gave each of them the same set of tasks to do, tasks which involved quick communication, quick understanding each other so that people could work together and complete tasks in a fixed time. They expected to find that autistic people would struggle with this. What they actually found, as you would expect, the non-autistic group performed very, very well. What
mhm.
you wouldn't necessarily expect, well, you might, but but a lot of people wouldn't necessarily expect, is that the autistic group did equally well. There was no significant difference in performance between the two groups. And the group that really struggled was the 50-50 group. And it really showed that, autistic people don't have problems with social cues, they don't have problems with communication, they don't have problems with working together and understanding each other, which is often assumed. They're very, very good at these things in the same way as non-autistic people are very, very good. It's just that they do it differently. The natural social cues are different. The ways of thinking are different. The communication style is different. And so when you had the two separately, I mean, the mixed group of half and half, that's when the issues came. The problem in society is that it's not half and half. It's 99 and 1%. So it looks like the autistic person has the problem, but it's not true at all.
It is very much. There are usually two ways of describing disabilities. One is sort of the medical model, which assumes that the ideal world is that there are no disabled people or no people with autism, but you also have the social model of disability, which is defined by um, the difficulties in communicating and working with other people who are different, to the person who is disabled. And autism very much centers around this social model of disability. It's so easy. It's so easy for autistic people to communicate and get on with other autistic people and have fruitful conversations and communicate and socialize. It's just different, and it's not a case of autistic people are amazing at communicating with non-autistic people, and non-autistic people are not very good at it the other way around. It's a two-way street, and I think autistic people do have to pull their weight in it. It's just that it's hard to want to pull your weight when it feels like nobody cares, nobody wants to work a little bit towards you and listen to the ways that you communicate and the way that you experience and behave in life.
Or people don't even see that there's anything to listen to. They just assume that there's something wrong with you or something.
Yeah, they just see the traits. That's it. They're like, oh, you've got a social disability. You can't. Your way of communicating isn't as good. No way. Like I took this social empathy test.
Right. Yeah.
This like a study, and it was all about sort of describing what a person would be feeling based on their eyes, and the sort of average score was about 26, and I scored about 34 out of 30.
Okay. Right.
So it's not a case that we're worse at it. It's just different, and it's hard to want to do that. It's hard to want to communicate with people that don't seem to care about your way of thinking and your way of life. It's sometimes, we hear a lot about us being difficult and us not putting ourselves in someone else's shoes, but when is it ever that people put themselves into autistic people's shoes? It's a hypocrisy at a large scale, I think. And if people were more aware of this social model of disability and they were aware of actual autistic people and their thoughts on things, then it wouldn't be as much of a problem. Yeah.
And I guess in my life, the people who've made the most impact on me have been people who have seen through the surface traits and, connected with me as a person, underneath connected with who I am. And that in turn puts me at ease so that I can be more natural with them.
Yeah, it's great when that harmony is there. Like it's a lovely thing. Like especially when I see people who are very shut off. There's a lot of shut off people in the autistic community, especially adults who are very lonely and they don't have much communication. Whenever they find a group that they're happy in and they get along with, and the other people are kind and understanding and willing to listen, it's a beautiful thing to see. Like it's absolutely lovely, and I just wish that was just more of an occurrence, especially in secondary school. Right.
What a brilliant note to end on. Thomas, thank you very much. Is there anything that you'd like to say to finish?
Yeah, I think obviously my documentary has gone out and it's been released, and you can find that. It's called Asperger's in Society, and you can find that on the Asperger's Growth YouTube channel and also the website aspergersinsociety.com. There's a lot of things like behind the scenes videos of the individual autistic people, and then I guess if you want to learn more about autism and my sort of views on things, you can either watch the videos about autism and mental health on the YouTube channel. You can follow me on my social medias at Asperger's Growth for Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And then also there's sort of more in-depth conversations that I have with other autistic people and other people with mental health conditions on the 40 Auti podcast, which is available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts.
And if anyone's watching this on YouTube, we'll put links to some of these in the text under the video. Thomas, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you very much for having me on. It's been nice to chat to you.